Let me now go on to stanza 3. Hearts with one purpose alone, through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone, to trouble the living stream. The horse that comes from the road, the rider, the birds that range from cloud to tumbling cloud, minute by minute they change. A shadow of cloud on the stream changes minute by minute. A horse hoof slides on the brim, and a horse plashes within it. The long-legged moor-hens dive, and hens to moor-cocks call. Minute by minute they live, the stones in the midst of all. Okay, and then he says here that hearts with one purpose alone, through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone, to trouble the living stream. So here again you see an image. Earlier we had the image of the motley. Here now we have the image of a stream and a stone. A stone that obstructs the flow of the stream. So he says that now this living stream here might be the ordinary life of these people. Life flows like a river in a very routine fashion. And then suddenly a huge stone, a boulder, is placed right in the middle of the course of this living stream or the river. And then what happens? Some changes occur because of this presence of the stone in the center. The water has the lashes against it, and the water is divided and it goes off. So a person can either choose to ignore the stone that is there in between and continue with his life, albeit with restrictions, because much of the space is now occupied by the stone, only a little space. He has to make small changes to divert his route and divert his course, and then carry on, because beyond the stone life flows on. So that is one choice. Or you may decide to deal with the stone, to either remove it from there and to get rid of it. So people have choices. So here what he might be intending to say is that such a stone suddenly was placed in the hearts or in the lives of these people. It obstructed the smooth and natural flow of their life. And so the life is the stream, and this obsession with the idea of freeing Ireland might be the stone. This nationalistic feeling, the feeling of patriotism, which did not allow them to lead a normal life, which forced them to become rebels, which forced them to plot and plan to somehow get rid of Britain. So that might have been the stone. And so these people, he's talking about the hearts of these people, hearts with one purpose alone, through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone, to trouble the living stream. So the minds of these rebels, they were so obsessed with this idea of getting rid of this stone, and they started making plans, and that is how the rebellion happened. And then he contrasts this stone, this unchanging stone that refuses to budge, that interrupts, that obstructs the normal and smooth flow of life. He compares and contrasts this particular stone to the rest of life. Everything else is going on. Like people like himself, Yeats himself, they belong to the category who just skirted the stone and continued with their lives. Same way, everything else too goes on. The horse that comes from the road, the rider, the birds that range from cloud to tumbling cloud, minute by minute they change. So there is change happening everywhere. There is a road by the river. The horse comes, not one horse, many horses come. A horse comes and it has a rider. Next time another horse comes, it is a different rider. There are birds flying all over in tumbling clouds, flocks of birds flying. There are birds that range from cloud to tumbling cloud. So the clouds are moving, they're changing shapes, and the birds seem to be flying along with the clouds. So minute by minute, the shape of these clouds change, the horses that pass by change, the birds that fly change, those birds go, other birds come. So changes keep happening. And you can see the shadow of the cloud falling on the stream, on the water in the stream. That also keeps changing according to the flow of the water. A horse hoof slides on the brim and a horse splashes within it. So a horse which walks too close to the water maybe falls into it and it slips into the river and it splashes around. There is a disturbance there. And in the river you also have moor hens, long-legged moor hens. Moor hens, you know, are water birds that kind of float and swim in the river. And so moor hens calling out to moor cocks. So their lives are going on as usual. Minute by minute they live. So there is so much of change and so much of movement happening all around. Life is going on, it's all its energy and enthusiasm. But here the stone refuses to budge. And now he goes on to the next stanza. He says, "Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. Oh, when may it suffice?" So he says that maybe like they have been suffering for a long time. They, in the sense, the Irish people have been suffering for a long time. And so maybe it is this long suffering that had hardened their hearts. These ordinary people mentioned earlier, who would have thought that they were capable of such heroism, such courage, such bravery? And so he feels that maybe it is too long a sacrifice. For a long, long time, Ireland had been suffering under the burden of British rule. And so maybe it must have been that hardened. That is what made their heart very stony, very hard. And that is what prompted them to take up a rebellion. So these people, they were troubled by the stone that lay in the middle. Unless they get rid of the stone, they knew that they would not have peace. And that is why they planned to stage a rebellion. And he asks God, when may it suffice? When is all this suffering going to end? That is heaven's part. So he says, God alone knows, because it is heaven alone that can decide when the suffering would end. That is heaven's part. Our part to murmur name upon name, as a mother names her child, when sleep at last is come on limbs that had run wild. So he says, it is up to the heavens to decide when the suffering or the sacrifice will be enough. But all that we can do as fellow Irishmen is to hail the names of these people, to murmur the names of these dead patriots, and to talk about them like a mother who would name her child who is dead. So here, when sleep at last has come on limbs that had run wild, a child, a little child, you know, it's very hard to keep the child still, make him sit or stand in one place. And so when finally sleep has come, so what sleep means here is death. And so finally, when a child is dead, the mother would lament the loss of the child. She would regret the things that she didn't permit him to do, and she would remember each and every one of his mischiefs, the little pranks that he did, and she would go on talking about him. So he says, what else can we do? We too, like the mother who had lost a child, can only lament and murmur the names of our dead friends. What is it but nightfall? No, not night, but death. Was it needless death after all? So he says, was it but nightfall? In the sense, was it a dream? Will they be here tomorrow? Will they all come back? But he says, no, it is not night, but it is death. There is a finality there that cannot be violated, that cannot be surpassed. And so they are all dead. There is no point in hoping that they would come back. And then he asks this question, was it needless death after all? So he wonders, was this sacrifice really necessary? For England may keep faith for all that is said, done and said. So you remember I had mentioned earlier that talks had been going on between Ireland and England had expressed a kind of willingness of letting Ireland go free. And so that is one reason why Yeats feels that this whole rebellion was pointless. See, if England was willing to give them independence, to grant independence to Ireland, why couldn't they have waited for a few more months or a few more years? We had waited all these centuries, why not a few more years? What harm would it have done? It would have at least kept these men alive. So that is why he is asking, was it needless death after all? For England may keep faith for all that is done and said. We know now actually when he says this, he might actually be hurting the feelings of the supporters of the rebellion. And I admire Yeats for that, because he's being very honest in his opinion. And he is openly suggesting here that he doesn't really agree or doesn't really support the rebellion. But then, as a fellow Irishman, it is his duty to talk about them. And as he is a poet, it is his duty, it is becoming of him to pay his respects to them, to immortalize them through his poetry. But personally, whether he agrees with what they had done is a question that remains to be answered. For England may keep it. Okay, we know their dream, enough to know they dreamed and are dead. So he says, of course, we know that they all had a dream of freeing their motherland from the stranglehold of Britain. But then what came of their dream? They dreamed and they're all dead now. Their dream led them to their death, untimely death, that too. And what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? When you look at it that way, isn't it the excess of love that bewildered them? In the sense that excess of love, sometimes excess of passion leads you to do unwise things or foolish things. And so here too, like we hear of crimes of passion, isn't it? People kill their lovers because they jilt them, or you kill people because of your, at times when you are very, very emotional. So those are called crimes of passion. So here too, weren't they bewildered by their excess love for Ireland? Was this exactly the right thing that they should have done? Shouldn't they have waited longer? Shouldn't they have thought of some other less violent means of redressal? So those are all the questions that are hidden there. What if excess of love bewildered them till they died? And then he leaves the question there unanswered. He goes on to do his duty as a poet. He says, I write it out in a verse, MacDonagh and MacBride and Connolly and Pearse, now and in time to be, wherever green is worn, are changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. So he says that as a poet, I pay my tribute to them. I immortalize these names through my poem. And he mentions 4 names here, MacDonagh, MacBride and Connolly. Connolly was not mentioned earlier in stanza 2. There instead of Connolly you had Constance. But here somehow he includes the name of Connolly, must have been one of the rebels, and Pearse. And he says that now and in time to be, now and forever, in all the years to come, wherever green is worn, green is a color that symbolizes Ireland. So wherever green is worn, these people will be remembered forever. And he is paying his tribute by immortalizing them through his poetry. And they are changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born. So he once again repeats the line, a terrible beauty is born. And he talks of how these people who led commonplace lives, how they were transformed into great national heroes and patriots overnight through their involvement in the Irish Rebellion. He does raise questions about patriotism and nationalism and violence. He doesn't really support violence, just as he did not support war too. And so you can see that though he is trying to give them what is due to them, though he is trying to express his respect for them, at the same time he cannot help himself from expressing his own personal views about rebellion and warfare. So that is the poem Easter 1916.